Hello, this is the tutorial on how to animate the Skyrig. Go first to the class webpage, click on Tutorials. You should have a tutorial here, the first one called Animating Skyrigger, and on it you should be able to right click on the Skyrig and download this Save Link As, and it should come in as a Maya file. Make sure it's coming in as a Maya file, not coming in as some sort of HTML file. So I've just downloaded that, and now I'm going to open it. And what I want to look for is, of course, the latest version of things. And when it comes in, it's going to look like this. So this is a little warning you get in Maya, but if there's nothing really pressing about it, you shouldn't have any issues. So here's the main character, and when you bring up the outliner window, you'll notice that there is geometry, there is the skeleton IFK, there is the control, and there's the skeleton. I simply named this character Dude, as every time you use Skyrigger, it requires a prefix for the character and then gives it throughout all the nodes it creates. So this is a mix of IK and FK, and it currently has a world bone, which means that this character is connected to 000 through a tail, so that when you move the character, that tail should stay exactly at 000. That is an option when you create something in Skyrig. It's on the character that you read in from the website, but you have the option to take that off and have the character created from the hip in case your engine or your engine needs are different. So let's get into animating the character. And I'm going to do to shade the character, as well as come in here to shading and click on wireframe on shaded, so you can actually see the construction of the character. There is a similar option up here, which is this icon, wireframe on shaded, and it's a toggle switch. Same thing, different places. So the character is a mix of IK and FK. And what that means is that every yellow box is kind of like the control system for an animator's mannequin. Every time you rotate one of the boxes, all of the children boxes underneath it rotate as well. Kind of obvious. So when you are grabbing the top node of the hips, everything above it will of course rotate at the same time. If you want to get more of a gradual curve, make sure that you shift select the several controllers you may want for this particular move, and when you have two or more things selected at once, you actually get a more gradual curve. So FK is basically all the yellow boxes. When you rotate any of these yellow boxes, anything that is below it as a child is going to rotate as well. So that works for the legs and the arms, and then you can ask, well, how can I make this adhere to the IK structure? Well, that's because each of these boxes, the ones here on the right and the left, are assigned when you bring up the channel box layer editor. They are assigned to their own layer, and they are colored for ease of use and ease to see visually. That the IK boxes for the hand, for the left as well as the right side of the character, are kind of hanging in space. And if you want to activate the IK controls for either the hand or the feet, you need to come in and actually grab the controller, the square controller for that. It's a little tricky down here when you get one on top of the other. You can always click in the area in the vicinity and then press F, and it'll do a closer frame so that you can be more meticulous about grabbing things. But if you want to activate the IK control, grab any of the IK boxes, the feet or the hands, and you should have in the channel editor this option here to see the switch IK-FK. When you click on the word for it with your left mouse, and then move your cursor out here to an empty space somewhere on the 3D modeling view window, you can hold down the middle mouse button. Your cursor will change to this cursor showing a left and right arrow, and you can very slowly drag it in one direction or the other. What I'm doing is I'm not only changing the number slowly in the switch IK-FK that I've selected, but notice that the hand is moving gradually more and more to be controlled by that box, and the yellow boxes eventually disappear. And that's a visual cue to show the animator you are not animating this character using FK, you are in fact using IK. You can then go to the Translate, Rotate tools and just move the box, and it controls the hand 100%. In fact, it controls the hand to the point where you can grab other controllers. Let's say that we grabbed the same hip one we grabbed earlier, and moving the character or rotating the character, the hand stays in space exactly where it is. Now there's obvious some sort of crazy deformations and possibly even popping because of the low quality of the polygon count of this character. But the point remains that even if you had a higher resolution cinematic character in here, that character would adhere their hands to that place in space. We do the same thing quickly to the right hand IK controller, and you can see it also kind of snap in space. You can translate it down. We can do the same thing for the feet. Switch IK-FK, and now the feet adhere to the IK controller there on the floor. It's a little stiff because we've exceeded the limits of the bone, so it's kind of stretched out, popped. When we bring it up, that knee gets a nice little bend. So for the elbows and the knees, there are controllers as well. Because the hands stay in space, you can grab the E or the K for knee. You grab the E for elbow and move it back and forth, and it sort of moves the elbow's direction while trying to, again, keep the hand in space where you've locked it, and not move the body so much, but just move the orientation or the direction of the elbow. And you can do the same thing, of course, with the knee. I find it's easier to actually pull these away from the knee for ease of grabbing it away from all the other controllers. This main controller is the circle here on the floor, as well as the arrow showing the way that the character should be oriented. When you move the whole of the character back and forth, IK or FK goes with it. So this allows you to spin the character in the air if you need to, or do some sort of crazy moves, but you still want to utilize IK and FK. And each of these controls, of course, you can come up here and simply zero them out if need be. One of the things that is useful for the foot controller, although this is a very low poly character, there's actually no polygon delineation for toes, so you're not going to see the effect of the toe here, but you can see it for the roll. And let me quickly go in and turn X-ray on. It's maybe a bit visually confusing, but what's happening is, I'll turn that off first. So what's happening is the IK foot control here, and I can move it away because it's not controlling the foot right now. As long as you see yellow boxes, that is a validation, that is communication to the animator that you are using pure FK. So how does that work? Well, let's do this. I'm going to grab this little rotation control for the hips, which allow me to do this little kind of hip rotation, and the character stays in place. And I'm going to press my arrow keys up, and it's going to go to the next controller, the root controller of the character. And I'm going to go into translation mode and then move the character up and down. The IK foot stays still. The FK foot goes, of course, with the parent. So remember, anytime you're using an FK controller, anything underneath it goes as well. So here's the foot being controlled purely by FK, and when I come down here and I activate the IK, it will switch its control down to the IK. So the thing that I wanted to point out regarding the foot and the roll is that sometimes people want to animate the character pushing off their toes. And you can, of course, do this by rotation and then translation up, and then another frame you do more rotation, and then you translate up. And all of that gets a little bit, can get tedious for people if they want it to be, if they just want the thing to kind of go up on its heel. So one of the things they may want to do is instead engage in, zero everything out here, is to engage in something called the roll. So just like we control the IK, FK switches, click on the name for roll. Come out here to your 3D modeling window. Again, open space, because you can, if you do it here, you might accidentally select something. But over here, hold down your middle mouse key and pull back, and what's going to happen is the character is going to initially go up on a toe and then push off automatically. And that just happens by dragging this control forward. There's, of course, a sort of an absurd maximum here you may not want to get to, but it's a nice way to get an automated push off the ball of the foot without having to go through the rigors of constant rotation and counter translation to get it to look like it's pushing off its toes. You can use IK and FK together. You can, for instance, move the shoulders up and down along with the hands being held in IK. You can animate the switch between IK and FK, so that if we were to set a keyframe here and then a keyframe over at 10 for full control of the IK, when we play this, of course, it's going to move up between the two controls. So you can utilize this to the needs of the engine or the needs of the game. Also, when you bring up the outliner, notice that these sets for the character are completely different from each other. Dude Geo is not only completely separated from the rig, it's also in its own layer down here. And the FK skeleton is automatically hidden. You can bring it up if you need to see the FK skeleton. And you can also hide the control systems if you need to. Hide the IK controls alone for the left or right. They're in their own separate layers as well. And you can also hide the skeleton if you just don't want to see that sort of irritating tail. Notice that when you set a keyframe, you need to be positive that you are selecting dude control, not dude skeleton. That'll ruin it if you set a keyframe. It effectively kind of destroys the rig. But the separation between the meshes, the controls, and the skeleton is intentional, because if you set a control for a pose, let's say you've got this kind of weird pose that I've got the guy in now, but I actually want to keep it. One of the things I can do to ease my life as an animator is when I go into the animation mode, let me bring this down a little bit. When I go into the animation mode for Maya, I can set a keyframe. Under key, go to the options, and I want to make sure that all keyable attributes, in fact, I'll reset this. All keyable attributes is set. The reason I want that is because I want to actually set a keyframe below the hierarchy. This is grayed out unless you click on all keyable attributes. Hierarchy below, and just by virtue of grabbing the top of the control and pressing S, I have set a keyframe throughout every single recursive or child control underneath. So it allows me to set keyframes throughout. In fact, I'm going to turn off shapes and set a key. So I've got keyframe throughout this entire hierarchy here. That allows me to simply go to my next frame and think up some other funky poses by grabbing all these controls and moving them separately, seeing what making a sort of a unique setup, and maybe even dragging some feet so it looks like this guy needs to hop on one foot. This is a very, very quick setup, and you'll notice also the FK controls. Usually the FK controls are just rotation based. They're not IK, they're not really translation. They're not, you don't move them, you simply rotate them. Again, like an artist's mannequin on a stick. So here's our next funky pose, and instead of going through and making sure that I have to set the keyframes for each of those constraints and controls, I simply go to the top, dude control, press S again, and I have a tick mark down here in the time controller validating that I have set a keyframe for this and for this part of the timeline, and no matter what part of the constraint structure I pick, I have those same keyframes. So now as I drag through the timeline, it goes from one pose to the next. So it's a pretty easy way of setting things up. At the very end, of course, if you want to bake when you're ready to export, and you bake the skeleton under Edit, Keys, Bake Simulation, make sure, again, I'm going to reset this. Make sure you've got below on. I don't have any shapes blending here, so it's not necessary to put that down. I currently don't have anything beyond this time range, but if I did, I would put in the start end. But I'll just do it for the time slider. And if I bake the character, I now can come in and delete not just the control, but the skeleton FK. And I've got the animation baked right onto the bones. It has a rotation value per frame, and that is for the whole of the hierarchy. So you can see this quickly. Go up to Windows, Animation Editor, Graph Editor. You can see that you have, in fact, let's go to the top node, press Shift and then the plus sign here. You can see that this has a keyframe for everything. Every frame and every joint has rotation values baked, whether they are moving or not. These are static. Doesn't matter. The point is you've baked absolute control onto the character, and you, in fact, at this point under Layers, don't need any of the unused layers. It sort of deletes them, and you're ready to export your character because it's now only two things, the geometry and the skeleton. All right, if you have any questions, let me know.